commander said the group is weighing martyrdom operations in southern Lebanon to block any Israeli foothold. That sentence, spoken in the kind of battlefield understatement that can carry the weight of strategy, has set off alarms across Beirut, Jerusalem and beyond. It was delivered against a backdrop of pitched fighting along the Israel-Lebanon frontier, a widening campaign of Israeli airstrikes that now reaches into the Bekaa Valley as well as the south, and a deepening political rift inside Lebanon itself. The language, a return to tactics, but echo the movement's bloodiest years in the 1980s. Signals more than a rhetorical escalation. It lays bare a question at the heart of the current crisis. How far will either side go to impose its will on terrain that has been contested for decades? On the ground, the fighting has assumed a grim, close-quarters character. Exchanges of small arms fire and short-range rocket salvos have persisted along the border, and over the past weeks, the Israel Defense Forces have publicly said they expanded the scope of their strikes. The IDF describes the moves as aimed at degrading Hezbollah's capacity to produce, store and launch weapons, and to deny fighters the kind of secure positions that allow insurgent groups to threaten Israeli towns and troops. For Beirut's residents, the expansion into the Bekaa Valley, long suspected by Israeli officials to serve as a logistics and manufacturing hub for the group, has renewed fears that the conflict will not remain limited to the usual flashpoints. Hezbollah's leadership, now headed by Naim Qassem, has framed its operations as defensive, a claim that resonates in towns that have for generations lived with the memory of occupation, counterinsurgency and cross-border raids. But the idea of reprising 1998-style suicide or martyrdom operations, as the field commander put it, crosses the threshold those tactics once defined part of the group's early Playbook A. Their reappearance would mark a tactically and morally distinct escalation, one that risks widening the war and deepening the humanitarian toll. Inside Lebanon, the commander's words landed in the middle of an increasingly bitter domestic debate. President Aoun, who assumed office as the country's president amid hopes of stabilizing years of political paralysis, openly criticized Hezbollah in a televised address. He accused the group of acting without national consensus and argued that the residents of southern Lebanon have repeatedly paid the price for conflicts fought on Lebanese soil on behalf of outside powers. In his remarks, he urged colleagues and critics alike to judge any future negotiations by tangible outcomes rather than accusations, a call that masked the deep unease among Lebanon's political class over the risk that the country will be dragged yet again into a confrontation its institutions cannot control. The Secretary-General of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, wandered angrily to calls that his group disarm. He laid out a series of red lines, an end to what he described as aggression across land, air and sea, Israel's withdrawal from disputed Lebanese areas, the release of detainees, the return of displaced residents, and reconstruction. He rejected direct talks with Israel, arguing that indirect channels and guarantees and the reversal of Lebanese decisions, he said, curtailed Hezbollah's military posture, were the only acceptable path. For Qassem and his supporters, the weapons and networks the movement maintains are not just offensive tools, they are framed as guarantors of sovereignty and deterrence in a region where alliances and capabilities are constantly shifting. The Israeli government has offered a different interpretation. It points to Hezbollah's rocket and drone activity, to arms depots and to the group's manufacturing sites across eastern and southern Lebanon as evidence of a threat that can no longer be contained by rhetoric or political negotiation alone. Officials in Jerusalem say ground and air operations are meant to create a buffer, to prevent Hezbollah from establishing positions that would pose an immediate danger to northern Israel. The result has been a series of tit-for-tat actions punctuated by substantial strikes in Beirut's southern suburbs and more recently concentrated attacks in the Bekaa Valley. Beyond the battlefield, the conflict has reverberated through wider regional fault lines. A senior Hezbollah lawmaker, Mohammed Raad, has used recent events to argue that Iran's defiance of external pressure has demonstrated the limits of American power and exposed what he called a fundamental miscalculation in Washington's strategy. In a strongly worded piece, Raad argued that the American view of Iranian society and resilience had been badly misread. He said, astonishment, shock and anger. He wrote that Mr. Trump had reacted to Iran's refusal to capitulate with those emotions, while Iran it. Self had shown instead unwavering confidence backed by widespread public support. Raad continued in the same passage to insist the Iranian population is not a passive mass, but in his words, active and serious producer of power. He concluded with a line that attempts to frame the trajectory of the crisis in bigger, almost historic terms, yet events have taken a different course, one that defies conventional expectations. Those words are freighted. They do not only evaluate military outcomes, they offer a political reading meant for domestic and regional audiences alike. A narrative that portrays endurance in the face of superior firepower as a source of legitimacy and as proof of a social cohesion that might, in the eyes of Hezbollah's allies, blunt the strategic advantage of the United States. The tension between kinetic operations and diplomacy has been on display in parallel talks aimed at limiting the wider war that followed strikes earlier this year. On February 28, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated operation targeting parts of Iran, setting off a chain of missile and drone exchanges, strikes on infrastructure, and a period of intense confrontation that lasted weeks. Those strikes and Iran's subsequent near-daily responses against military and economic targets roiled global energy markets and prompted urgent shuttle diplomacy. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araqi has spent recent days in a whirlwind of travel, Islamabad, Muscat, and finally to Moscow, to shore up support and to press for guarantees amid a fragile ceasefire and faltering negotiations. On arrival in Russia, Araqi told interlocutors it was time to update and coordinate positions. He made clear that regional concerns such as the security of maritime routes remain at the center of Tehran's calculus. As he framed the diplomatic task, he argued for continued expert-level talks with neighboring states over the strait's security and the management of shared maritime interests, emphasizing the need for practical coordination to protect economic and strategic lifelines. The diplomacy has been fitful. A brief ceasefire brokered in April provided a breathing space and an opening for limited exchanges that might lead to longer talks, but progress has been fragile. Delegations from the United States traveled to Pakistan in a move intended to build momentum, only to have planned meetings delayed or curtailed as negotiators assess conditions on the ground. The diplomatic record in recent weeks reads like a stop-start. Discussions that show promise, sudden reversals, and the realization that any political settlement will have to resolve not only immediate military demands, but also deep structural grievances that have fueled cycles of conflict for a generation. Back in Lebanon, the political fallout is rising. The president's public rebuke of Hezbollah has complicated efforts to present a united national front. Some in Beirut's political elite worry that the country is sliding toward greater instability at a time when basic services are already strained and the economy is fragile. Others fear that any move to constrain Hezbollah's military wings without a credible security alternative could leave a vacuum that neither the Lebanese state nor international partners can fill. On the streets of southern towns, residents speak of homes reduced to rubble, of bodies buried beneath collapsed roofs, and of the old rhythms of life distorted by checkpoints, evacuations, and the constant drone of aircraft overhead. International aid agencies warn that the humanitarian burden is mounting. Hospitals stretched, supplies constrained, and civilian casualties rising with each expansion of the strike map. For many families, the calculus is immediate and brutal. Who stays? Who leaves? When to risk returning? Military analysts watching the fighting say Hezbollah's potential shift back toward more extreme forms of asymmetric attack, including the type of martyrdom operations mentioned by the field commander, would be a calculated gamble. In the 1980s, those methods were part of a repertoire that carried a different political and technological context. Today, with precision-guided munitions, extensive surveillance, and a region-wide web of alliances and rivalries, the consequences of such an approach could spread far beyond Lebanon's borders. An attack inside territory controlled or protected by Israeli forces would almost certainly trigger a forceful response and could draw in supply lines, theaters, and allies in ways that are difficult to contain. The calculus of deterrence in the region has always been complex. For Israel, crippling Hezbollah's capacity to wage asymmetric war requires striking at depots, launch sites, and the systems that allow for sustained rocket and drone campaigns. For Hezbollah, dispersal, decentralization, and the survival of its political network inside Lebanon have become priorities. Both sides know that escalation has costs not just in military terms, but in political ones, in how domestic publics react, how international patrons and mediators respond, and how fragile states in the neighborhood fare when geopolitics overruns everyday governance. Outside the immediate theatre, the fallout has been diplomatic and economic. International markets jittered when shipping through the Strait of Hormuz was threatened. Insurers raised premiums for vessels transiting the Gulf. Energy prices spiked and then shuffled as reports of continued skirmishing circulated. World capitals have dispatched envoys, and some have warned against a slide into regional conflagration that could engulf multiple fronts. In Lebanon itself, the question the country must confront is stark. Can it reclaim the monopoly of force necessary to steer its own foreign policy and security decisions, or will it remain a battleground where surrogate conflicts are fought by competing powers? President Joseph Aoun and other Leb and IC officials have tried to assert the need for negotiated outcomes that restore stability and protect civilians. Hezbollah, for its part, insists its arms are a necessity in the face of what it portrays as existential threats. What happens now will depend on a mix of battlefield decisions, diplomatic resilience, and the political choices made by domestic leaders across the region. If the pattern of recent weeks holds, limited pauses, bolstered local offensives, and periodic attempts at diplomacy, the conflict is likely to remain volatile and unpredictable. If, on the other hand, either side adopts a posture intended to force a decisive outcome, the human and strategic costs could multiply quickly. For now, civilians keep counting the days and the strikes, and leaders keep trading demands and denials. Mohammad Ra's words, with their mix of derision toward American strategy and confidence in Iran's resilience, will be read in Tehran and Washington alike. As he put it, astonish me. Certainty, shock, and anger. He said unwavering confidence backed by widespread public support. He said active and serious producer of power. He concluded, yet events have taken a different course, one that defies conventional expectations. Those sentences underscore the challenge in a region where symbolism and military facts mingle. Narratives can shape strategy as much as weapons do. The coming days will show whether the narratives of endurance and deterrence that some leaders invoke can produce the political compromises necessary to stop another round of destruction, or whether they will harden into a protracted contest with consequences that no side truly wants to manage alone.